it's much more important to pick your head up and sort of see the big picture, right? The forest from the trees, as they say. And to be honest, that makes your job way more enjoyable anyway, right? Like to know how the thing that you're working on integrates with the bigger picture, right? And the bigger picture is always more interesting.
Hi, everyone. It's Dean.
And it's B. We're here to help you build your commercial real estate network so you can get your foot in the door and design the career of your dreams.
We interview leaders in commercial real estate and hear their stories of failure, triumph, basic survival, and hard-won wisdom.
It's like having coffee with the real estate pro.
You're listening to How I Got My Job.
Dean, this is going to be a good one. And I know I say this a lot, but I'm so humbled to have this person on the podcast today.
Jon Martin is truly an extraordinary individual. And Jon, we're so excited to have you. B's going to give a little bit of your background, but we're going to be talking the whole podcast about your background. So we don't want to spoil the whole story. I will say just a couple of points. Jon, you're our first true principal to come on. We've had a lot of folks on the investor side. We just had Peter Brofman from GCM. We've had Christina Scarlato from the World Bank, Sajith from the World Pension Fund. The list goes on, but it's great to have somebody on the principal side to tell their story as well. So we're really excited.
And this is a dynamic story. And so typically I go through a whole bio, but I really want to take the time and do the bio live with Jon. I think it's a dynamic story, and it's not, his beginnings are not where you would think at his position the beginnings would be, right? And so I will say this, Jon Martin is the Chief Executive Officer for AEW Capital Management, a leading global real estate investment management firm with over 84 billion of assets under management. And that's just a mic drop right there. Jon, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. It's great to be here.
Jon, just a quick question, because it's on your website as 84 billion. Is that number still accurate, or are you still running that number up?
It's still accurate, although, with everything that's going on in the market right now, things are trending down a little, right? And so I'm sure that'll go a little lower before it gets a little bigger.
So what I'll say is, Jon, like the way we like to start the episode is understanding, what does a CEO actually do? We know it's the top of the top, but what are you guys doing over there? What are you doing as a CEO?
Well, it's about managing the platform overall, right? We have business units that work across the globe, right? We have a private equity business here in North America. We have one in Asia as well, and we have a global securities business. And those businesses have great leaders that are running them, day to day. So it's my job to work with them and make sure they have all the resources to get ahead, and then work on the bigger corporate projects that are going on. I've used the analogy many times in the past. The job is kind of like driving 5 cars home from work. You can move each one about 100 yards, and then you got to run back and get the other one. It takes a long time to make progress, but that's sort of what it involves.
Great. And Jon, if you don't mind telling our listeners, a lot of them are college students. We're actually now getting a following of much more experienced executives that just love hearing about people's life stories. So they will know of AEW as a real institution globally, and certainly with roots in Boston. But just telling us a little bit about AEW and your strategies across all your platforms and your global reach.
Sure. So we got our start in 1981. So we've been around for a little over 40 years. We're a global real estate investment manager. So what we do is run funds and separate accounts that invest in direct real estate assets all around the globe. We tend to do those regionally. So we have a North American platform that invests in North America, and Asia platform that invests in Asia. We also have a global securities platform, though. So we invest in REITs, public REITs, in some of those funds as well. We have products. I think one of the benefits of being as large as we are, we have products that run across the risk return spectrum. So strategies that meet all of the needs of the different investors that we talk to, from lower risk, core strategies that are investing in high quality real estate, to higher risk opportunistic strategies where we're doing things like development and redevelopment, and then everything in between. So I think it's really great. And I think one of the things nowadays too, a lot of our investors are looking to sort of shrink the number of managers that they're working with. And so being able to offer a wide variety of products is a big advantage, I think, in today's world.
I think that's absolutely right. And for our listeners in college, what we do, Jon, is we break out in the show notes so people can understand separate accounts, funds, they'll understand core and value add and all that stuff. So listeners, please check out the notes as you're looking to kind of understand how the different managers that we talk to work. Well, Jon, thank you. I think I'm going to bump it over to B because we want to hear your life story. That's what this is all about.
So, Jon, let's start from the beginning. You're living in Milford, Mass. You know nothing about commercial real estate. Your parents are not a part of the commercial real estate world. Talk to us about what that was like. And then even how did you figure out what college to go to? Let's start from the beginning.
Sure. I mean, I did. I grew up locally in Milford, Mass. My father was a first generation college student, from a small town in Kansas who had gotten a scholarship to MIT here in Boston and ended up staying here. So he was an engineer. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, and I was just an average, high school student at Milford High. I ended up going to college at Notre Dame, and the draw there was my best friend growing up. He had an older brother who played football for Notre Dame when we were little. So he was on TV all the time in the 70s and some of those big Notre Dame Texas games. And so we worshiped the ground he walked on. And from that day on, I was headed to Notre Dame. I was pretty sure. I think I was lucky to get in. But that was sort of what brought me there, right, from the very beginning. Yeah. And then, at Notre Dame, I knew I wanted to do business, right? So I went into the business school and I ended up majoring in finance and accounting. Because they're both so related, right? And I really wanted to pursue finance, and that's what I spent most of my time on at the school, and really had a great time there and learned a ton, right? Met a ton of different people, and when it came time to graduate, this was really right around 1990, 1991. The economy was in a pretty tough spot at that point, right? And there weren't a lot of jobs around, and it really wanted to go to New York, really wanted to go to Wall Street because it sounded cool, right? And work for an investment bank or one of the consulting firms, but those really weren't opportunities that were available. So I ended up falling back on my accounting roots and took a position with PricewaterhouseCoopers and started my career there in the accounting firm here in Boston.
And can you walk us through, at Pricewaterhouse, you were able to really touch on different career or industries, correct? And then how did you fall into commercial real estate within that? And the reason I want to dig into that is because students really, when they graduate from college, they do not know what they want to do. But this opportunity allowed you to see different industries and really make a decision at that point.
Yeah, no, you definitely. I mean, that is one of the advantages of the accounting firms or the consulting firms. You get to see a lot of different companies, a lot of different industries, how things work. I got lucky and use your word, fell into real estate. One of the very first assignments I got was a real estate firm that actually was one of the firms that merged together to form what is today AEW. So I had a chance to learn about the industry there. Knew nothing about it in school, right? It wasn't anything there was a class on or anything like that. But also had a chance to work on a bunch of other things, insurance, banking, even had some tech companies and, manufacturing companies. So really had a feel for that, but really developed a passion for real estate and spent a lot of time on that one engagement and learned a lot, right? I thought it was really interesting. It was a challenging time for real estate, kind of like the market we're in right now, actually. And that's actually when you learn a lot, right? When things aren't going always according to plan. And I think that was really fortunate. I worked for Pricewaterhouse for almost 10 years, a little over 9 years, and spent some time in Minneapolis too, living there when we got a new assignment, and that was great. Learned a lot there. And then when I decided, that wasn't going to be for me, the career for me long term, I started looking around, and there was an opportunity at AEW, and of course I jumped at it because I knew the firm, knew the industry really well. I was excited to learn more. But it is It is interesting, right? Like in the early 90s, real estate really wasn't an accepted like institutional asset class. It was growing, right? But it might have been, for institutional investors, it was 2 or 3% of their portfolio at best, right? And so you can understand why there wasn't a lot in college back then. It just wasn't a very large thing, right? And now it's grown to where, almost all your institutional investors have allocations that are 10, even as high as 15%, to real estate, and the business has grown, and there's a lot more resources out there to learn about it. But I think I was fortunate to have sort of fallen into it when I did.
Yeah, Jon, I looked at your career trajectory, and certainly real estate has had a great run since 91, but that really is the history of the institutionalization of real estate, and with all the fund managers that we've been talking about, those were the early days, and it's become more and more. Jon, I wanted just to dig in because we talk with a lot of students, right? And a lot of people come to us that know about real estate, and they just want to be in acquisitions, right? They're trying to do that. And I came from a legal background and had worked at Mintz Levin for 6 years in their real estate. B came from an accounting background as well. And I always tell folks, look, go where there's an opportunity where you can learn and gain some skill sets, because there's so many different ways to attack the real estate game, but you really want to build some hard skills so that you can add value and think about it. But I'd be curious on your perspective around that, Jon.
Yeah, no, I would agree 100% with that, right? There's a lot of different ways to enter our industry. And to be honest, over the course of your career, you want to know how to do all of them anyway, right? Like, so you come in any way that you can, and you get the experience that you can, and build on it and look for opportunities. And that's really something that I think I've done over the course of my career, is just look for ways to kind of branch out and take on different things, learn new things, and really round out your skill set. But of course, everybody wants to come in and do the investing, right? Like that sounds like the most exciting thing, right? Like getting out there and actually buying these, 50 and $100 million buildings and doing all that. But you got to have a great base of knowledge to be able to do that, right? And so finding the way to build that is really the key, as you were saying.
And so this part is my favorite part of your story. It's getting your road to CEO is what I like to think of it as. So you find a way into AEW through the accounting department. You go there, you lead the accounting department, but you don't stay there. Can you walk us through that road to CEO? And there are so many lessons and themes, and I want to make sure we pick out all of those things.
Yeah, you come in, I came in to run our accounting department, and that was great. That's what I had been doing for 10 years. I had the skills to do that. And came in and really focused on that and dug in hard and worked at that for a number of years. But always being opportunistic, right? Like looking for other things out there. And I, one of the first opportunities was an unusual one, right? Well, I was here a couple of years. Our IT department, we had the person who headed that department left. We had some other people leave. We had some turmoil. Wasn't really sure what we were going to do with it. And I went and saw our CEO at the time and said, I can run IT for you. I can manage IT. And he said, really? And I said, yeah, of course. Said, you don't want me fixing your PC or anything. I said, but I can manage a team and build the team and get the right resources. So I picked up in the IT group and have managed them ever since, right? And that was great. I've brought in a great head of that business who runs that. And then it's about finding other opportunities. So then down the road, there was a similar opportunity to manage our asset management group. And I took that and did that. And then after a few years of that, we decided we were going to launch our first open-ended fund. We'd never had an open-ended fund in the past. And I raised my hand for that and said, hey, I'm happy to take that on. I'll do all the legal research. I'll work with the lawyers. I'll do the market research, figure that all out. Spend a year or so doing all that. And by the time we were ready to launch, I was the person who knew the most about it. So I was able to finagle that into an opportunity to work on that portfolio management team, where I spent 10 years, learning from a senior portfolio manager who was on it, who was awesome and really taught me a lot. But also I did all the capital raising for the fund. I did a lot of that. So I got to meet all the investors, started to learn about capital raising and investor relations and all of that sort of stuff. And that was great too. And then, fast forward all of a sudden 10 years, and I was able to raise my hand for more of a corporate role. and I became our chief operating officer. And I oversaw, in addition to everything else, I oversaw our investor relations, our corporate finance team, our human resources, and that was great. And then eventually that resulted in me becoming CEO at the end of 2020. So it was a long and winding path, right? And certainly not one, I certainly didn't walk in here in 2001 saying, I'm going to be CEO someday, right? Like it was really just about the opportunities that present themselves and how you take them.
So it's three things that come to mind when I hear this story. First thing is transferable skills, right? You knew what you didn't know. I didn't know how to do IT, but I know how to manage people. And so you raised your hand and you said, hey, let me do that, right? Talk about how important transferable skills are, because some people don't recognize them as being one of the biggest skills you may have.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, all roles have some sort of level of skills that are consistent across them, right? And you touched on the main one, right, which is being able to manage and organize people and process and get things to work, right? And through the course of my career, I've always really enjoyed like getting a problem, something that isn't working right, and thinking about how you're going to fix it and make it a better process, right? So thinking about it from a different perspective, coming at it from a new angle, something like that. Bringing in the right people if you don't have them already, build the team up to get there. That's the same whether it's accounting, asset management, IT, capital raising, whatever it is. And so those are the skills you kind of bring across, and that ability to think about how things work. It's always like a puzzle, right? I always like that. Every problem is like a puzzle, and you kind of think about how you can fix them and make them better. And that's really been the consistent theme across probably all the roles I've had, and it's the main role I have today, right? Like that's really what my job is to make sure that things are working the way they're supposed to, that everybody has the resources that they need, and that we have all the right people in place for sure.
And the second thing,
Go ahead.
Dean, I do want to go through the three because
Yeah.
I want to pull them out. Paying attention to the bigger picture of the organization. So if your head was down and just thinking about accounting and not pulling your head up, because obviously when you're busy working and you're like, I'm building out this team, you're focused, but you need to take a moment sometimes to lift your head up and say, what's happening around me and where else can I help? Can you just emphasize a little bit more on that?
Yeah, I mean, you're right? Like your primary focus when you start a job needs to be getting that job done right? So you got to put your head down. You got to make sure you understand what you're doing. You got to get good at it really quick and work hard. But then it's much more important to pick your head up and sort of see the big picture, right? The forest from the trees, as they say. And to be honest, that makes your job way more enjoyable anyway, right? Like to know how the thing that you're working on integrates with the bigger picture, right? And the bigger picture is always more interesting. So, and then, by having that up and being aware of what's going on around you, that's when the other opportunities present themselves, right? And you can see what's out there that you might be interested in and learning and getting involved with. And that's what makes a career really exciting, right? And being in the position to take those opportunities.
Yeah. And then the third one, which is, I think, one of the most important points that I want students to take away, is getting into a company however you can, and then being able to move around. And there is only one way to do that is to build your reputation in the position that you're in. So if you go into a position that you may not love, but really put your all into it, there are other opportunities that will come in front of you. And so your trajectory really speaks to that. Would you add to that or in any other way?
No, I think you put it really well, which is, when you get the opportunity to get into a company, any company, right? Like I said earlier, your first priority is to do the job you've been hired for really well, right? Like put your head down, figure it out as quickly as you can, and work really hard. And that's important because that's your first impression, right? That's the impression that everybody takes away from you. And you can be doing anything from accounts payable to acquisitions, whatever it is. If you're grinding it out and really working hard and like interested and motivated, people recognize that, right? And then that's going to incline somebody to give you, other opportunities as they come, right? And so once you do that, then it's really about being a sponge, right? Like soak everything in around you. What's everybody else doing? how does that fit into the bigger picture, as we were talking about, like really understand that. But that first impression is everything, right? And getting that, and then that's what will create a ton of opportunity for you in the long run.
Jon, I love it. And it's interesting. Greg, my business partner, and I both had similar experiences, as did B. Greg always says, look, he started in acquisitions, but his most informative experience was he got put in asset management after the great financial crisis, and then went into investor relations, and that helped him really connect the dots. B, you've been in asset management, you've been in accounting, you're on the IR side right now. I started as a lawyer, went over to brokerage and consulting, started the business, and have morphed roles. What I'm curious about, Jon, I think a lot of our students face is, how do you build the confidence within yourself to take on roles that probably in the beginning you still have a lot of work to do on? And I think of that transition to IT for you, Jon. You certainly know how to manage people, but I imagine that there was a fair amount of substantive work that you needed to work on to get yourself up and running, to understand the complexity of all the systems at AEW. And I'm curious, for our students that they're trying to balance what we call this dichotomy between soft skills and hard skills, right? They're trying to learn the substance of their job so they can do a great job. And then they're trying to learn how to navigate the politics of things. And sometimes you're a little bit ahead. You may have navigated the politics and got into a new job or a new role, but you really need to focus on the substance at that point. Or you focused on the substance, but you haven't done anything on the soft side or with your interpersonal stuff to be able to move up. And so would be curious about just sort of addressing those two topics, which is really confidence, and then how do you balance between hard skills and soft skills?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, confidence is everything. And when you feel confident, like you do better, right? Like, so you want to be opportunistic. You want to look for things that are out there. You don't ever want to put yourself in a position where you're unlikely to get it anyway, but where you end up sort of in over your head, right? And something that you don't need to do. And so you look for ways to learn as you go. So if you, like, say you're an accountant and you want to go into asset management, it's about finding small ways to volunteer to help on a project, right? Then maybe we're doing an acquisition and we need a little help, going through the leases or something like that, right? And so building up a little bit of confidence as you go before you make the bigger moves, and putting yourself in a position to succeed, right? But I think you can have a lot of confidence in just knowing that you're going to work hard, right? And you're going to tackle any problem that's in front of you and be able to go at it and be willing to take that chance, right? And it's okay to make a mistake here or there too, right? Or and I think what I've found over the course of my career, especially here at AEW, is there's so many great people who want to see you succeed too, right? Like, so there's so many resources to lean on. And, over the course of my career, like say when I was working on that fund for the first time, so many other portfolio managers around the firm you can go talk to and learn from. And that's some of the networking that you talked about a little bit, that you referenced, right? And building that internal network so that you've got people that can help you as you take on a new role. And that helps you build up that confidence that you can be, successful in the long term. I think of it sometimes, it is office politics, right? That's such a negative connotation to it. But to be successful in anything, right? Like, you need other people to help you get things done, right? And so if you understand how your office works, who's there, like what their different roles are, and then just as importantly, like what motivates those people, like how are you going to get the cooperation of everybody's different, right? And neither good nor bad, right? Like, just knowing, how to interact with somebody, understanding that how you're going to get someone's cooperation is really important, right? And that helps you throughout your career if you can navigate those things. So those social skills and personal skills are pretty important as well.
And so, Jon, I love what you're saying, because it falls into that category of networking never stops, and networking within your organization. When we talked before, that was something that you mentioned was a big piece of your growth in a career. Can you dig into that? And what does that really mean? And how would someone go about doing that?
Yeah, I mean, networking is super important, and I don't think I understood that almost until I left Price Waterhouse almost, right? Like it just wasn't my upbringing, right? My father was an electrical engineer. That's a heads down, kind of position. My mother stayed at home, right? Like they weren't serial networkers. But once you get out in the world and you kind of understand how it works, especially in our real estate industry, which is relatively small, networking is really important to get to know as many people, whether it's at your school, right? Like getting to know other students who are going to be in that field as well, or getting to know people as you run into them in different businesses. Like that's great from an industry perspective, right? Like it's going to help you get deals done in the future or, get a position maybe somewhere else. Right? That's all great. But it's equally as important internally too. And it goes back to what we were just talking about in terms of, knowing who the people are who can help you get your job done and achieve your goals. And that networking internally is pretty easy, right? Like I think you'll find most companies, people are pretty friendly and they want so it's about going out of your way to schedule a coffee with, somebody on the acquisitions team, if that's where you want to be someday and getting to know them. It's about spending time with someone in asset management or IT or accounting or whatever it is, right? And really building your network across the company. Because all those people are people you're going to need at some point during the course of your career, to help you get a project done or do something like that. And so if you've taken the time to build those out, like it's only going to help you in the long run. And that's not a hard thing to do. It's something you actually have to work at, right? Like you have to go out of your way. It's very easy to come in every day, put your head down and do your job and walk out the door at 5 o'clock. It takes a little extra work to just get around and meet somebody, but that's not really hard in the long run, right? So it's a good thing to do. And I think I've learned that over the course of my career through a lot of the different people that I've worked with, right? And it's been a big part of what's helped me be successful.
Yeah, John, I think that's so important. And I know from a lot of our students, I get the feedback of, does it make any sense to network with people my own age? Because they're just analysts and not in senior roles. And I've always said, look, you're planting a lot of seeds when you're younger, and those things come to fruition. And that's in many ways why it's a lot easier when you're in your mid 30s, onward, because you've spent a lot of time in your 20s and early career planting seeds. But I don't know if that rings true to you, John.
Yeah, agree 100%, right? Those people, your fellow analysts and associates or whatever they are, they're going to be the senior leaders when you're a senior leader, right? Like it's amazing how fast the years go too, and how quickly that happens.
Yes.
But yeah, no, that network is just as important, if not more important than networking with the more senior people in the industry and in your organization too, right? Like, so I agree 100%.
And John, the follow-up question is, you just seem to have a just amazing group of folks that work at AEW, that work for you. We've hired a number of them, and you have this great alumni network really across the real estate industry. And I think over the years, you guys have established a pretty well-renowned and incredible culture. I'd be interested in what do you look for when you're hiring new folks coming out, and how do you think about folks that have a lot of experience in real estate or don't? Or is there a set of core values that you look at from analysts to senior managing directors that may come over to your team?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I mean, our culture is a big part of our firm, right? And the credit for that can go back to, leaders that came before me, right? And establishing that. And I think what makes this a great environment is it's pretty collegial, right? Like we're a big shop, so we have 900 employees globally. We have, 350 here in the US. You get to know all those people. So we're not, as big as some of the biggest, where there's 20,000 employees, right? And that's a collegial environment, and it's good to learn from other people. And I think, we've never been that sort of sharp-elbowed, competitive environment where, I think it can be a little bit tougher, right? And so that's been a part of our success. So as we're looking for people to join the firm, like we really want those types of cultures. We want people who work well in that kind of environment, that like to work in teams, that have that sort of collegial um, uh, backbone to them, right? And are going to be, good people that will fit into the existing infrastructure. But then we also look, for people who really are fiduciary mindset too, right? I mean, that in the end, there's nothing, I mean, your firm, my firm, like there's nothing more important, right, than representing the interests of our investors. And so we want to make sure we're hiring the right people that bring that mindset as well. And, it really is, for a lot of the younger folks that come in, that's a lot easier, right? Because those people will mold to the culture, right? Like I think as you're bringing more senior people in, you want to make sure, equally as important for them, that they feel like this kind of an environment is one that they can succeed in, and it's one that we feel like we'll be successful with that person in as well. And that's a hard thing to do. So that's not a test that somebody can take, when they're interviewing. So it is a soft skill.
And maybe just one follow up, because we're dealing with it in our business. You've been with the company through major growth, right? How did you keep that culture as you grew? Was it intentional, or did it sort of happen organically?
No, I would say that's probably one of the biggest challenges from the day I took my job, was how do we keep this great culture, while also realizing that we've grown so much that we have to change somewhat we can't do things the way we did them when we were a $20 billion company, now that we're an $80 billion company. And so bringing in some of those big company processes and things, and really making sure that you're not messing up the broader culture, has been a key focus of mine. And it can be done, right? You just got to kind of think about how you work all that in. I think one of the things that I've done in the last few years, where we've had to bring in people from the outside, say, our CFO retired a number of years ago and I had to bring in a new CFO. I really actively went out and looked for somebody who had big company experience, who could help us come in and figure out how we put that in. And then you find the right personality to fit into your culture, and that's how you make it work. But it is definitely something you have to consciously work at, and would really hate to see, great success, but this place becomes a lot different. That's not something that you want to see happen.
And it comes from top down, Jon. The fact that you sit on the ESG committee and the diversity and inclusion committee, that's obviously something that's important to you as an organization, for the CEO to sit there. Can you talk a little bit about what that means and those initiatives for the company, and even yourself, and why it's so important for you to sit on those committees?
Well, I mean, I think it's something that is definitely a part of my job, right? Like that, Dean said it, like tone from the top, right? And making sure people know that those things are very important to us. If you think about ESG, right, that is just such a growing area in our investment space, right? And we need to be on top of it, right? It's about risk. It's about understanding how it affects our assets. It's about driving returns for our investors, right? And how we're going to maximize those. It's about creating buildings that are attractive to the tenants of the future that you're going to need. It's about attracting capital, to sources, right? Like, so there's nothing more important than that, right? And so I really like to sit on that committee and make sure that I'm, up to speed on everything that's going on. We brought in, like everything else in my career, right? Like, I'm not repairing your PC. We brought in some great people, who have the expertise in that field, right? Like, to be able to do all that. But it's important for me to stay connected and make sure I understand what's going on. And then from a diversity and inclusion perspective, that really goes back to the culture, right? Like, that is very much about making sure, you guys see it as well as I do. It's so hard to bring talent in today, right? Like, even with the economy slowing, it's still super competitive. You can't make a wrong decision, right? Like, you need people that come in. So you got to make sure that once you get those people in the door, that you grow them, you keep them happy, that you give them something that gives them drive, and that all is diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? Like, and so creating that environment where people really thrive here is extremely important. So that's why I love to be involved there too, and thinking about it. And diversity isn't just diversity for diversity's sake, right? Like, it's about bringing talent into our industry, right? And we talked earlier about how this wasn't really even an institutional asset class in the early 1990s. The business has grown so much over the last 15 to 20 years. The workforce has not grown along with it. So to the extent we can bring more and more talent into this industry in general, I think that's the key, right? And if we're doing that and we're recruiting from different places and we're bringing in more talent, 5 to 10 years from now, hopefully we won't even be talking about diversity, and it'll just be there, right? And that's really been one of the big focuses, that I've been spending a lot of time on.
And Jon, I want to take this moment to speak directly to the pipeline that we would like to see coming into this industry. You mentioned a few times during this podcast that the market isn't that great, but that really shouldn't be a deterrent. Can you just dig into that comment a little bit and why they should still come into this market, even though it's not great right now?
Yeah, no, it's definitely, the market has slowed, right? In terms of, so the Fed raised interest rates the most ever in history, right? And that definitely is going to slow things. That's their whole point, right? They're trying to slow the economy and stop inflation. And that's had an impact on commercial real estate, right? Interest rates have risen so fast, no one really knows what an asset is worth. So there's a wide bid-ask spread out in the market for assets, and that slowed things. So we, in a really big year, we'll do 100 transactions, 100 new investments per year. In the last year or two, we've probably done 20 or 25, right? That's a dramatic decline. So that's what I mean by things slowing. But things are actually almost busier, right? Because the assets that you own are facing different challenges, right? And it's it's easy when the markets are running really fast to be successful in everything you do. In fact, you could say the more risk you take, the better, right? It's during markets like this that things get more challenging. You actually have to work harder. I think Dean mentioned it earlier, a partner who started in acquisitions and ended up in asset management during the GFC, right? We did a lot of that here during the GFC. I imagine, we have a lot of our acquisition people now who are helping on some of our asset management stuff as well. So there's actually more work to be done. And I would argue that this is a great time to come in. You learn more in a market like this than you do in a market that's running really hot, right? Like when you see problems that arise and how you solve them and how you address them. And when I first came into the industry in 1991 and 92, it was terrible, right? The markets were down. I remember thinking at the time, why would anybody invest in this, right?
Yeah.
But no,
those are the times to invest.
Exactly. Those are the times to invest. And I learned a lot there. And I think we learned a lot during the great financial crisis too, right? And so it's actually, I would say, and I actually just said this to a group of students that were in here, this is a great time to come into our business. You'll learn a ton. There's actually a lot to do, right? So I think that, maybe it's a little harder to find those opportunities than it was, but they're definitely worth pursuing, given everything that's going on.
Jon, I want to give you a chance to highlight, because I met you, or we first started talking about this podcast at an event that you were hosting, and really lending your time and your company's time to help build a pipeline of underrepresented students into commercial real estate. And when I look at all of the funds you are managing, all of the people, you really do put your time and resources, which are probably the most valuable things, behind these things. But Jon, if you want to take a second just to talk about what AEW is doing and some of the opportunities that are out there.
Yeah, we did. We met at an event that we were running for a group called Project Destined, which is a fantastic organization. And there are several others that are out there as well that are doing similar things, that are really trying to bring new talent into our industry, right? And as I look at the problem, multiple problems, in terms of how difficult it is to hire people and bring them in, that's really where diversity comes in, right? It's about bringing more people into our business so that we have more people, more talent to sort of mine and bring into the firm. And so Project Destin is, and some of the others are doing some great things where they're educating people about real estate while they're still in college, right? Yeah. Educating them on what careers are in our space. And that's something that I didn't have when I was in college. I didn't have a real estate course that I could go to. There wasn't there, right? And, we've really struggled over the years. We want to, when we were hiring, at our more junior levels, we want people with a little bit of real estate experience, right? So that meant we were stealing people from you, or you're stealing people from us, right? To get them there. And, for groups like Project Destin, who spend a lot of time providing classes and stuff for students to take to learn asset management, to learn development, to learn acquisitions and market research and all those sorts of things, valuations. That's great, right? These kids are getting skills and as students that we didn't have the opportunity to get. And it's providing a pipeline of talent to us that has been really successful, right? When you're trying to get a position in a firm like one of ours, right? Like the more you know, the better, right? And if you're coming out of school and know some of the basic concepts, that's really going to make you stand out versus some of your peers, right? In terms of being able to get those opportunities. So I really looked at it as like, that's time well spent, right? Like with these organizations to continue to develop the people that are coming into our industry, to bring different people in as well, right? Like people from different backgrounds, from different locations, not from just the schools in the Boston area, because that's where we are, right? Like, let's go a little bit further and try and find, different opportunities. And, that solves a lot of problems. It solves our talent problem, right? Like over the long run, brings more people in. It solves a diversity problem because you're going farther abroad to bring in talent. And, I've just been amazed at some of the great people I've been able to meet through these different organizations who are like highly driven students who really are, have a passion for real estate, and they get that from these organizations. And so it's been a great experience. And I can't tell you how many students then reach out to me, through different things that I work on, right? And you make time and you connect with people. You'd be surprised. And this goes back to that networking thing, right? Like how many people are willing to take a call or a coffee or whatever. And you can make those connections, even though you might not think that you have them. You always know a friend of a friend. You saw somebody speak at a conference, or, you took part in a real estate competition and I was a judge on it. You can reach out, right? And that's a great thing to take advantage of. And so I think there's a lot of great things that are taking place in our industry today that are going to reap some really long-term benefits.
Jon, thank you so much for continuing to give back to just this whole platform, not just on the investor side, but also the people coming in and just really taking the time to talk to the students, because you understand how important it is. And so again, we're humbled to have you here. We usually close out with a specific question. Dean, do you want to jump in and give Jon that final question?
Yes, certainly, Jon. We typically call it the hot tub time machine question. But I know our students love it, which is, if you were to go back in time to your 20-year-old self, presumably at Notre Dame, then, and give yourself one piece of advice, what would that be?
It would be to don't stress, right? Like when you're coming out of school and you're trying to find your first opportunity and where you're going to go, it's really stressful, right? You're trying to think about it, and you're trying to, and I see it now. I have kids that are in college, and that internship that you have to try and land is super competitive, and your career is so long, right? And there are so many twists and turns that you're going to take. Like, don't worry about it, right? Like, and if the economy slows, I've been saying this to a lot of the students I've been talking, if the economy slows right now, like that's fine too, right? Like your career is long, look for different opportunities, ways that you can learn. If you have a passion about real estate, there's so many opportunities to learn, connect with one of these organizations like Project Destin, take advantage of those things. And you're going to be fine, right? And don't overthink it too, right? Like you can't, we said at the very beginning, you can't come into a job as an analyst someday and say, well, I'm going to be CEO in 25 years and here's step A through Z that I'm going to go through to get there. Just be opportunistic and look to just always be building your skills, always learning something every day. I still am today, and after all these years, right? A lot of things I wish I knew last year that I know now.
Well, thank you, Jon.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you guys very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to How I Got My Job, a podcast from Coffee Connectors.
Coffee Connectors helps connect first-gen college students with a whole new level of opportunity in commercial real estate.
To learn more, visit coffeeconnectors.com.
We would love to connect with you.